So in terms of, we have some apologies, and we have some people joining remotely, so they're not with us in the room. The apologies with Melanie Williams, but in terms of people joining online, we've got Bola, I think. Welcome, Bola, from the United States of America, and Ruth Owen, who I think is nearer at hand, but not with us today, and then Joyce Frederick, who often does attend this meeting, is not attending today. And I think that's all the apologies, but the welcomes then are to Z. Shirapinda and to D. McAvoy. Z is the Equalities Network rep and D is the Trade Union rep, and we'll be hearing from them later on.
Do you want to mention Phil and Jane as well? Do you want to mention Phil and Jane as well?
I can also mention the fact that we have attending with us today. Sorry, I introduced them for the private board this morning, but Phil Llewellyn, who is attending as an observer, and Jane Burns, who's attending with a very important role in terms of governance that we are working on. So, general welcome to everybody. There are no board members attending who've not attended before. The declaration of conflict of interest. Kay, do you want to say a word about one it's to note?
Sorry, I nearly didn't switch it on. Just to declare that my husband is now working as a Director General in the Departments of Health and Social Care and also across NHS England.
Thank you. So that then takes us to urgent business, and obviously the main urgent business since our last board meeting is that our Chief Executive, Sir Julian Hartley, has stood down, and people will be aware of the circumstance relating to that because he was previously a Chief Executive at Leeds where there are concerns about maternity. But in response to that, I'm absolutely delighted that Aaron Chopra, sitting next to me, has agreed to be the interim CEO, and with him, Chris Usher has agreed to be interim deputy CEO, and Chris Sakiti, who actually I should have said is not with us this afternoon, he's been appointed to Aaron's previous role, but so he's the interim Chief Inspector of Mental Health. So those are some important changes that we have got to note. Any other comments or questions about that before I move on? If not, we can go to the minutes of the last public board meeting. That was the one on the 24th of September. You've had the minutes. I suppose the first question is, are there any points of factual accuracy that we need to mention? And then are there any, if not, are there any matters arising? Sorry, Esther, I didn't spot you.
Thanks, Chair. Just a correction on page 8 of the minutes. We talk about the acronym LGBT+. The comment that we made was actually in relation to the data that we were discussing that was just purely in relation to LGB and not T. So my point being that there is an issue around the reporting that we have between gender and sexuality, and that was the point. So we just got that wrong in the minutes.
Thanks, that's important. We can correct that. Any other points of fact that we need to consider? If not, we can move on to the matters arising and the action log. And the action log and the decisions log, or the action log is wonderfully short. There's nothing on that, so that's good. And then there's the decisions log, but I don't think there's anything there they were all things that were approved or agreed. So we'll note that. Good. I think, Aaron, that brings us on to your report, the ET report to the board.
Thanks, Sir Mike. Good afternoon, all. I'll start by just saying thank you to colleagues at board and across the organisation for their support as I've been taking on the interim role. So thank you to colleagues. I'd like to mention at the outset, over the last couple of weeks, we've held a series of events across the country with in-person events with colleagues from across the CQC. Leicester, Manchester, Newcastle and London. Delighted to say we've had over 1,000 colleagues together. And it's been an absolutely brilliant opportunity to discuss our rebuilding the organisation roadmap with colleagues and provide that detail and assurance to them about how we are working together to rebuild some of the foundational improvements that we know need to be made. I'm going to invite Esther to speak a little bit more about that at the end of this update. It's also been an opportunity to listen to colleagues about the concerns that they have, and as an executive team demonstrate how we are working together to address those concerns as per the roadmap and other areas that they've highlighted to us. It's also been a really important opportunity to reflect on the great work that many colleagues are doing towards our core purpose, which is about protecting patients and people who use services and supporting services to improve. And an opportunity to express our gratitude again to Sir Julian for his leadership, the clear plan that he provided around our foundational improvements, which we are very much sticking to. So I just wanted to say that right at the outset. So Mike's already mentioned Chris CQC stepping into the interim Chief Inspector of Mental Health role, and my gratitude to Chris again for that. I also wanted to mention a couple of changes that we've made to the portfolio within the executive team, which are as a result of recent changes. So I'm pleased and would like to say thanks to Chris Badger for taking on the role of Caldecott Guardian and to Tolly Onon for taking on the role of Executive Sponsor for Freedom to Speak Up. So thank you to both of them. On another exec portfolio update, thanks to Professor Bola Olawalabi, who is joining us remotely today, who has taken on the executive lead for our work around health inequalities. Bola is recognised around the world for her leadership in health inequalities, quite rightly so, and she's going to be playing a pivotal role in making sure that our assessment framework is a powerful tool to use the regulatory levers to ensure that we are reducing health inequalities. So thanks to Bola. Just a couple of areas before I... Oh. Thank you. Hopefully you can hear me again now. Just a couple of other areas. I wanted to mention our assessment framework consultation. The assessment framework is an absolutely powerful tool, and the mechanism that we use when we cross the threshold and when we're looking at services to see how they are, how they're working. The assessment framework consultation is open. It closes on the 11th of December. We've already had a great response. I think more than 800 responses. Chris Day is going to speak a little bit more detail about that in a second. And I also wanted to mention the work that's taking place at NHSC on the quality strategy. We think we're really supportive of this quality strategy. I think it's a mechanism to make good on some of the recommendations that we saw from Lord Darcy's review and from Penny Dash's review about how we embed quality as a principle within our services. We are really keen to play our part. Again, going back to the assessment framework, the way the assessment framework and the rating characteristics about what good and what outstanding looks like will be really important to embed into the quality strategy. So we're really looking forward to continuing that work. Of course, the NQB is chaired by Sir Mike and Penny Dash, so we're really looking forward to working on that. On that note, I'm now going to bring in Esther to speak a little bit about the roadmap that I mentioned. So over to you, Esther. Thanks.
Thanks, Aaron. So just to set a bit of context for colleagues, colleagues may recall at a previous board meeting for our digital rebuild programme, really acknowledging the report that Peter Gill did and his recommendations that we took at public board, as well as other recommendations we received about the challenges with our regulatory platform. Since we released that indicative roadmap, we did quite a widespread external stakeholder views on that roadmap. And one of the questions that we had, and quite rightly so, is how our digital roadmap fitted in with our other change programmes. And so the paper here that we have, the very simple one slide, is a summary of our roadmap, our delivery roadmap, across all of our foundational improvements. So just a very brief whistle-stop tour for colleagues, just to orient you to this slide. So the first kind of swim lane or horizontal section is around our policy work that Aaron has just mentioned. So our public consultation is now live. There is also sector-specific consultation work that is underway, led by our chief inspectors, and you'll see the date ranges of that across the top. The next kind of horizontal swim lane is about our integration work. So again, colleagues will be aware that we moved into sector-specific teams on November the 3rd. That is not the end of that journey, it's only the start. And so there is activity ongoing in that space as well. And then the third and the fourth are around our digital and data roadmaps. So a couple of principles that, again, I'd just like to outline for colleagues and anyone watching. The reason we have sequenced our digital roadmap in this way is because we are prioritising the area of most risk first. So we are prioritising our assessment functionality first in real recognition of our key aims to increase the number of inspections that we are doing, but also in recognition of the real challenges on the ground that our colleagues are facing from a health and wellbeing perspective. Absolutely acknowledging that other areas have experienced challenging, and I'd really like to acknowledge that our providers who have previous problems with our registration functionality, and also providers who have had problems with our provider portal, are absolutely not forgotten, and we have planned those into the roadmap in phase 2. So I think that's probably all I was going to say, Aaron and Chair, just to orient colleagues to that. But again, you'll just see those stop signs, and what we are really trying to emphasise, and we've been doing that at our events as well, is to just share with colleagues this is a really planned and structured approach, and we will be pausing and taking stock if we don't feel it's safe to proceed. So I hope that's a helpful summary. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Esther. And should we go on straight on to Chris next, or do you want to come back on that?
Just a couple of... Just come back. Thanks, Esther. Just before we come to Chris, I'd checked in with my exec colleagues, and if there's any other updates, we can take them in a second too. But I know, Tolly, you were very keen that we spoke about an issue which we think is of great importance, and we'd like to talk about that now. Thanks.
Thank you, Aaron and Chair, for prioritising time at board for me to give this public apology to Sarah Hawkins and Dr. Jack Hawkins, who are the parents of baby Harriet Hawkins. Harriet was sadly stillborn at Nottingham City Hospital in April 2016 after a series of mistakes in care by hospital staff. Last year, we decided to commission an external independent review into CQC's knowledge and handling of information relating to Harriet and our engagement with the Hawkins family. The need for this review arose in response to concerns about how we'd handled information that came into CQC regarding the care received by Harriet and her mother Sarah. We're working directly with Mrs. Sarah Hawkins and Harriet's father, Dr. Jack Hawkins, to develop the terms of reference for the review and to agree next steps. Now, while I don't want to preempt the findings of the review, I do understand that we have evidence that indicates that we, CQC, provided a statement in June 2024 that was inaccurate. We provided that statement to the producers of an ITV documentary, Maternity, Broken Trust, and it was not accurate in relation to when we were first made aware of the details of Harriet's case. On behalf of CQC, I've apologised in writing to the Hawkins family for this error and for the distress it's caused them. I know we're all truly sorry. I have shared my commitment to ensuring that the independent review will provide clarity, answers and learning, and that will be, our contribution will be through the terms of reference. It is otherwise an independent review, but we will take the learning that arises from it to improve how we handle information coming into the organisation so that we're transparent, accurate and compassionate in our dealings with families, patients and service users. And I have also written to the production company with our apologies for the inaccuracy of that statement. Thank you.
Thank you, Tolly. Thank you.
My thanks too for that. Shall we now go on to Chris? I think you're going to mention a bit about the assessment framework consultation.
Just to provide colleagues with an update, the numbers change all the time. We've got around 1,000 responses now from providers, from stakeholders, particularly stakeholders who represent people who use services, from colleagues in CQC, and also directly from members of the public. As Aaron said, the consultation closes on the 11th. Just a couple of key themes that appear to be coming through in the early sort of conversations. The reintroduction of ratings characteristics with a clear, simple definition of what services, what it means for services to be good, outstanding, or indeed requires improvement and adequate, appears to be finding quite a lot of favour, as well as the reintroduction of sector-specific assessment frameworks that help us understand what good looks like in the different sectors that we regulate. Just a further plug, we've got over 3,000 providers and people who use services who will be involved in the next stage of our work around the assessment frameworks, and there's still opportunities for colleagues to be, for people to be involved. You can go to our website to register your interest in that. It's clearly linked on the homepage. And just to make one further link between what Aaron said around NQB, it was really important in the conversation we've had with NHS England and DHSE that we are able to find a strong link between what good looks like in the context of the assessment frameworks that we have for different sectors and what quality looks like articulated through the quality strategy. So we're working very closely with our colleagues in DHSE and NHS England. I'd like to thank them for the way in which they've worked with us around making sure that the work that we do, the work in the assessment frameworks, the 5 key questions, relate strongly to how the quality strategy will eventually be deployed.
Thank you, Chris. Aaron, any further points on your report?
Thank you, Sir Mike. Thanks very much, Chris. It is just so important. The assessment framework is how we will ensure that patient voice and what matters to patients, carers and people who use services is central to what we look at. So it's really, really important to us. Nothing further from me. I just want to check if there's any other further updates from any of my exec colleagues that they'd like to share. Thank you.
Or indeed comments and questions from other board members about what we've heard in the executive team report and Aaron's report. Alex.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Thank you, Aaron, for the report, and thank you, Tolly, for making that apology. I just wanted to pick up on your and Chris's points about the National Quality Board, and I welcome the fact that Mike was asked to co-chair it and all the points you've emphasised in your report. I think perhaps the other point CQC should make, and we have the levers to help, is to ensure that the providers we regulate of all flavours are putting discussions on quality and outcomes underpinned by high quality data at the heart of their discussions. And I think when you look at board papers, often they are pivoting to the finance and to performance targets and decoupling that from the wider quality. So in the world I operate in a acute trust, really, they're not looking at outcomes they once were around risk-adjusted mortality, readmissions, length of stay, and so on and so on. So I would welcome CQC pulling our levers to ensure that those discussions are returning.
I think we would all support that. Aaron, back to you.
Thanks, Alex. I mean, it's one of the themes that's come up at every one of our events that our inspectors are saying it would be so helpful for us to have really powerful clinical outcomes as part of our data and insight tool so that we have that information to hand when we're going out. So absolutely, and it's very much part of the roadmap around the data and the digital space that we're in, and we'll be working with our sectors to make sure we've got the right sort of clinical outcomes in our data and insight tool available for our inspector and enforcement colleagues. Thanks.
Any other points on this agenda item? If not, we can move forward. So I think our next item is market oversight. Have we got the relevant person here for that?
Not yet. Phil's just gone to get him.
Right, but is in the building
As far as I know. Yeah.
Okay, well we'll hold on for a moment to see if James White is around.
Is he not here?
Not here yet. If that is the case, Chris, could we do the finance book one, performance finance risk assurance?
Yep, happy to. So this is the performance update to the end of Q2, so the end of September. I'm just going to pull out some of the key areas to focus on and just say a bit about risk and a bit about finance. So in terms of assessments, we set ourselves a target of delivering 9,000 assessments by September 2026. We're on track for that. We've currently done just short of 3,000 to date, or at the end of September, which is above the target we've set out for that point in the year. We are just monitoring that closely. That's good and that's positive, and it's above where we need to be. But we have also just realigned colleagues into sectors, and we will be rolling out, as I said, we've got a roadmap of change. So we just need to monitor that closely and ensure that we remain on track. There are areas within the delivery you can see in the detail of the balanced scorecard where we're slightly behind where we need to be. Mental health sector being an area to pull out, which is largely due to the complexity, I believe, in that sector, as well as resourcing challenges. But overall, we're on target to where we need to be. With regards to registration, the overall volume of registration that we have in the system is reducing, as is that over 10 weeks old. So we now have just over 2,700 registration applications over 10 weeks old. That's 30% lower than it was at the end of Q1. So you can see overall, and the main metric that we track in terms of over 10 weeks old is coming down. In September, we completed the most applications so far this year. Our KPI is shown red because we have set ourselves the target of clearing over 10 weeks old by the end of the year. So whilst there's good performance, good trajectory, it is still red based on that assumption, and we're just reviewing our forecast and our trend and how realistic it is that we deliver on that. Information of concern is a slight outlier in our performance, another one to pull out. We've done great efforts to clear backlogs of information of concern that we had earlier in the year. We've cleared through them, and what we've now set ourselves as ambitious targets to get back to business as usual KPIs. And I think that transition is proving quite a challenge as colleagues are delivering, respond to information of concern and our assessment targets at the same time. So all areas are currently below target and struggling to see consistent improvement. I can see the figures beyond this period, and I can see we are starting to see improvement in those areas, and there is a targeted focus on that. But that remains an area, an outlier in our performance. Some positive areas to pull out as well, in addition to the ones I've already talked about. Our timeliness to complete assessments is below the target. Is below the targets we've set, both in adult social care and primary community care at 37 days on average, and in mental health and specialist care 83 days, which is both below the targets we've set. We've also got the NCSE core lines continue to deliver really strong performance across the board, which is really good performance this year. Local authority assurance delivery is progressing well, and our mental health act monitoring visits are also performing well. So you can see in the balanced scorecard there's lots of positive areas to pull out. We are tracking risks across the organisation, as you would expect. We're also just in the process of introducing a board assurance framework, as well as reviewing our corporate risk register. The current register has 24 risks in there. The majority are rated higher than we would want. And just pulling out the key risks that we have at the minute, improving our longer term productivity. I've talked about the 9,000 target, but we also need to make sure there's a sustainable uplift beyond that. That's currently highly rated on our risk register. I think our focus on the programme of change and the roadmap that Esther talked about, our better systems, revised methodology, will all help enable unlock longer term productivity. Staff wellbeing morale is one of our highest risks. There is still a lot more to do. We touched briefly on the conferences this week, which we've gained a lot of good feedback for, but there is more to do, and this will kind of centre around our values and behaviours looking forward. Another closely linked risk is our culture, leadership culture. We've had lots of feedback about inconsistent leadership across teams in CQC, and the work that we're setting out to do on those hexagon slide pieces in the update before kind of shows our plan around how we can address this through leadership development. And lastly, stakeholder confidence in our ability to improve is another risk that we're tracking. It's currently rated highly, and we're tracking closely. Chief Inspectors working closely with stakeholders across sectors on our rebuilding work and how ensuring they can be involved in the consultation on assessment framework, as we've talked about. Finally, just in terms of money, at the end of July, we were running with a 0.1 million deficit. We're forecast to have 0.7 million underspend by the end of the year. Our depreciation this year and the level of depreciation is playing a key role in our underspend because we have an impairment of our regulated platform and low capital spend. Without that underspend on depreciation, we would be forecasting an overspend as an organisation. So that's a fortuitous position. And on capital, we've spent minimal capital to date, and we expect to be underspent for the end of the year, and in conversations with the department about that and about whether we return money back to them. And that was it from me.
Thank you very much indeed, Chris. So quite a lot that's positive, but still a long way to go on some of those metrics. So let's open it up to discussion. Kay.
Thanks, Chris. Sorry, I'll just get this. Great to see the positive trajectory. I wasn't around the board table when those performance metrics were set, and I just wondered how we are also looking at the quality of some of those outputs, because the danger is if you start chasing quantitative targets that actually we don't have a full picture on the quality. I imagine is quite a complicated performance measurement question, and we might not be able to do it here, but I would like us to come back to that. Otherwise you could end up unintended consequences as you're chasing volume targets. So that was number one. And the number two, and you would expect this from the Audit and Risk Chair, there's a lot of risk outside of tolerance, and it just might be helpful to understand what the exec are doing in terms of risk management in a little more detail.
Do you want to come back on those, Chris?
Yeah, I think that's a fair challenge, Kay, in terms of looking at our outcomes. And I'm conscious of Alex saying to focus on performance and finance, and then I do an update that doesn't focus on outcomes, playing right into that question. Chief Inspector colleagues might want to come in on terms of the outcomes and the quality inside that we're trying to deliver. In terms of the risk, so we've recently set up a subcommittee of an executive team, a risk committee, to focus exactly on this. We're having a review through all of our risks, looking at our path to green, if you like, and when we expect to see those risks and what activity we can do to support that, and where we need to do more. Because I agree, the view across the risk register isn't where we'd like it to be. We need a plan to get out of where we currently are in terms of the level of risk.
Completely agree with you, Kay, that it's not just quantity, but we have to have quality in what we do. And I think one of the things that I would say to that is part of the purpose of getting back into the sectors is with chief inspectors leading that, they will also be responsible for making sure that our inspections and our reports are of good quality. It is very early days to having the 4 chief inspectors, but that is going to be a major part of their function. Esther.
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple of things I wanted to pick up from the report, and thank you, Chris. So the first one was just to say a big thank you to my registration colleagues, because I know they have been engaged in such hard work to make improvements and reduce the backlog. So a really big thank you to those colleagues. They've introduced some really good practice stuff, so some additional quality checks and some streamlining of their processes, but absolutely appreciate there's more to be done in that area, but I just wanted to say thank you to them. The two other pieces I just want to raise were under the people section. So colleagues will note that our technology and digital space has quite a high number of vacancies, and I just wanted to explain why. And that's because, colleagues, our pay scales limit us from paying industry standard rates for our highly technical, skilled roles. So we actually use alternative methods to kind of deliver those resources, but that's the reason why. I just wanted to explain that. And then thirdly, just picking up your point, Chris, in terms of culture, just again reflecting on our events over the last couple of weeks, totally agree there's some real positivity in the room. And it just made me reflect on a lot of what I heard from colleagues when we met them was, we really like the words, we really like where this is going, but we need to see tangible improvement. And it just really struck home to me about how we as a board are responsible for that tangible behavioural values and ways of working shift that our colleagues really want to see.
Thanks, Esther. Bola, your hand is up.
But thanks, Mike. I just wanted to come back on the question in relation to quality. I think it's an entirely reasonable question to ask, particularly, Kay, as you say, as we go towards driving up the volume. What we have been saying as chief inspectors is we need to drive up the volume, the consistency, and the quality of the assessments and the inspections that we are carrying out. A number of things are going to help us in that endeavor. As Mike has just said, the return to sector alignment, the reprioritization of subject matter expertise will be incredibly important in reinstating that quality element. The other thing that is very clear to us is that in addition to the assessment framework review and refinement, there's something about how we train, upskill, and support our frontline colleagues, whether that's inspectors or operational managers. And we're all clear-eyed that actually as the front line part of the CQC, we do need to invest a huge amount of effort and energy in the training and upskilling of those frontline colleagues to make sure we do have that consistency of quality. Beyond a CQC purview, I think the development of the quality strategy is another really important system-wide development, which as chief inspectors, we will be leaning into that space going forward along with Chris Day and his team and the work they've been doing there, because it's really important that we support the system as it defines what quality means, because of course, as the regulator, it will be on us to hold the system to account, to deliver on what the quality definitions are. So internally as the CQC, return to sector alignment, subject matter expertise, training and development of our frontline staff. On a system level, chief inspector involvement as the national quality strategy is developed, just in response to your question, Kay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Bola. Any other questions on performance, finance, risk assurance? Richard.
Just briefly to acknowledge, although we're clearly unhappy about the number of risks that exceed tolerance, etc., quite a few of them are interlinked, and the CQC way, the plan and the strategy, I would hope we'll see a bit of momentum behind. So 2 or 3 things that if they get right, particularly things like data quality, other things flow from that. So I mean, perhaps what we ought to maybe look at from the executive team is just look at what a trajectory of change might look like on this, and how some of the interlinked indicators might create this, a positive outcome, by when and by what milestones.
I think that's all on this item, but I think we do now have James White in the building, so we'll bring him in so that we can discuss market oversight. Chris, once he's here, do you want to do an introductory bit? Reminding people what market oversight is all about. Well, welcome, James.
Welcome.
So I'm going to ask Chris to introduce this, and then we'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Chair, and I'll pass over to James shortly. Just a reminder, especially for colleagues new to the board, that market oversight is a distinct responsibility CQC has in relation to the adult social care market, in particular to have in-depth and intense monitoring and, in a sense, financial surveillance of the vitality and risks associated to business continuity of the largest care providers, either through things like number of home care hours delivered or number of care home beds, with the crucial purpose of making sure there is early warning signs of any potential risk to service continuity, which of course in reality means continuity of care to people across England. The team work very closely with providers to share information and insight, with of course the approach being to try and identify problems as early as possible. In addition to that, that surveillance provides an insight into the overall care market, albeit it is a certain part of that market, and James has insight and data that's representative of that segment, which he produces on a quarterly basis to share to board, and he's here today to do that. Thank you.
Over to you, James.
Thank you, Chris. Before I go on and speak to the paper, I'd just like to cover off inclusion in market oversight is purely down to your size, which makes you potentially difficult to replace. In no way does it reflect heightened or lessened risk of business failure. Presently, there's 62 providers in the market oversight scheme, and that's split roughly 1/3 of those providers are care home for older people providers, 1/3 are home care providers, and 1/3 are specialist providers who predominantly care for people with a learning disability and autistic people. In terms of the paper itself, it covers a 2-year period up to and including the 30th of June 2025. And importantly to note, in that period, it also covers the quarter from the 1st of April 2025, which is where we see the impact of last October's budget for the first time in terms of an increase in national living wage, NLW, and an increase in employers' national insurance costs, ENIC. Given those two increases, we've done some analysis work with the providers and other stakeholders. We estimate that leads to an increase in staff costs from the 1st of April of around about 9% and upwards. We also know from other stakeholders and work we've done with providers that there have been uplifts from LAs in the region of 5 to 6% for home care providers and specialist providers, and 4% for care home for older people providers. What that means is there is a funding gap for those MO providers, which they have to address in the short to medium term. What it also means is that we were not particularly surprised to see a decline in EBITDA margins across those three subsectors for the period from the 1st of April 2025. I'll now move on and speak to each of the three subsectors in turn. In terms of care homes, one of the measures we find particularly useful to understand their financial performance is their occupancy level. As at the 30th of June 2025, it's at 87.5%, and that's recovered and recovered well. Pre-COVID, March 2020, that was at 87.1%. It took quite a large decline during COVID due to increased mortality levels, unfortunately, but that has built back. To give you some further context around that occupancy level, we estimate to reach a cash-even break-even level for providers in market oversight. They need occupancy level of around about 85%. So that 87.5 is an average occupancy, so that does mean there are some providers in market oversight who still are not at that cash break-even level. In terms of home care providers, I think this sector for the 2 years to 30th of June 2025 could probably best be described, their performance, as fairly flat. Look, we've reached that opinion from conversations with their management team. There is a cohort of providers in that subsector, around about 40% of them who have sought to grow their hours organically. And we've actually seen a slight decline in those hours of 1.3 percentage points over that 2-year period to 30th of June 2025. We've also seen in that same period 4 quarters of decline in EBITDA margin to the 30th of June 2025, 1.7 percentage points. It remains a really competitive environment, home care. I think, and this is in the state of care, for period 2023-24, CQC, we saw an increase of 11% of the number of providers registered for home care. Moving on to specialist providers, pretty much all of their revenue is state funded. That's either LA funded or NHS funded via ICBs. Given that fact, quite often in their negotiations for fee uplifts each year, they're in a position where they're a price taker. And look, that's partially been reflected in an EBITDA decline in margin of 0.8 percentage points to the 30th of June 2025. On the flip side of that, it's been pleasing to see an increase in EBITDA margin for the 2 years to 2025, June 2025, of 1.5 percentage points. And what we've also not seen, and we were concerned around this, and I think other stakeholders were, we've not seen the level of contract handback, which we thought may have been a result of that increase in employers' national insurance cost and also the national living wage. I'll now move on to the outlook for the sector. And one point I particularly wanted to speak to was in relation to MO providers and ASC generally, in terms of we've seen quite heightened activities of mergers and acquisitions, particularly within the care home for older people space. And look, we think that will continue into 2026. A large amount of that activity has been undertaken by real estate investment trusts, or what we call REITs. And their business model, at its most simplistic, is relatively straightforward. They buy the bricks and mortar, so they buy the care home, the properties. They then partner with an operator who will lease the care home and they will deliver the care. In October just gone, we saw two very sizable transactions. That was by a US-listed REIT, Welltower Inc., where they acquired the property portfolio of Barchester for £5.2 billion. And also took a shareholding in HC1 of £1.2 billion. And they're two of the larger care home providers in the UK. I think ultimately these transactions and this investment is underwritten by the ageing demographic of the UK population. You know there's going to be demand there, unfortunately. I also think it shows some confidence in the UK economy and the business sector. I also think it shows some confidence in the regulatory environment here in England for adult social care, but also in the other three home nations. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, James, and a very important topic area. Chris, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, the other thing I would add, and James has referenced it in the slides, is around really positive reduction in agency spend, which is in those MO providers, which is obviously important financially for those organisations because agency spend costs more, but now as importantly, more importantly, in terms of continuity of people that are delivering care and support for people that take those services, receive those services, having staff that they know and trust is really important. My word of warning looking into the future is that reduction in agency spend, we believe in quite significant part would have been related to increases in international recruitment. And I think in the State of Care report and launch last month, I was clear that changes to that will, I think, mean that the care workforce in terms of overall quantum is more fragile than perhaps it appears. So the future outlook is one that I think still presents quite significant risk to the care sector. And I think it's important to note that and for us to understand that that risk may well emerge over the next year or two. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. Questions or comments about market oversight? Chris Day.
Just to say, this is really, really important work, and thank the market oversight team for the way in which they produce this. As we say, we use this a lot in the State of Care report. A couple of things are really interesting to note. The paper mentions a growth in private funded care businesses and specialist private funded care in terms of EBITDA. It'll be interesting to see what impact that might begin to have on the variation in care across different parts of the country. And I know that's not, I know you provide a national service, but I think there will be interesting to see how that plays out regionally. And I think your point about continuing to watch the relative fragility of the workforce, again, potentially by different sector and by different area, will be really important. But thank you for the work. It is important for how our regional and national oversight of all the sectors. But and as colleagues will know, what happens in one sector affects what happens in the others as well. So it really does give an indicator of where concerns and issues might rise. So thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So we now move on from there to the Equality Network and Trade Union updates. Who would like to go first, of Z or D?
I think we've agreed I'm going to go first. See? So thank you very much for inviting us again today. I'm Dee McAvoy. I'm the lead steward for the Royal College of Nursing and the Joint Trade Unions at CQC. And I'm just here to give you some feedback from our members on some key issues. I wanted to say, and I'm sure Z will say the same, that our members are committed to the improvements and delivery of effective regulation, but they're also clear about some ongoing challenges, and we've already heard Esther's been very transparent about that in terms of the tools and the methodology, the increased demands, and we see that in Chris's report with the competing priorities, you know, the assessments and the priority cases and so forth. And so that does continue to place that some strain on some of the teams. I think it's our aim to provide that constructive feedback, and also to continue to highlight those areas of collaboration where we can strengthen our well-being support for our staff, and also ensure actually that the frontline voice of colleagues is reflected in discussions and decisions. And we welcome the board's and recognise the board's commitment to improve that continued partnership, and we're grateful for that. So I think we had three main areas to talk about today. The first was the move back to sectors, so huge piece of work. We recognise, the joint trade unions recognise and support absolutely that strategic intent behind the move, as outlined by Penny Dash and our own Mike last year. It's gone reasonably well. There have been some hiccups, but overall, and I think it's been welcomed by our members. Certainly, I've been told to say thank you to Esther for the shout out on all colleague calls, and the thanks for the wealth of activity that takes place behind the scenes to get us there. So people were really keen that to say thank you for the recognition, actually, because some people, you know, they beaver away. So in terms of some of those pressures, capacity issues, so concerns are being expressed around capacity issues in teams. That's across regions. Primarily, we're hearing feedback about adult social care and secondary care, so that's hospital inspections. We understand that there are still some vacancies. We know we've got inspectors on boarding and we've got some new managers coming into post, but there are gaps, and that does then place, you know, those adverse effects on our colleagues and our members, and we know that's being addressed. We're very much looking forward to the workforce plan, something tangible that we can share and be transparent about. I think there's a real sense that the numbers in ops are not quite right. I know the budget is tight, Chris, and fees are difficult, and we can have those conversations elsewhere. And we would hope that that plan then would have those realistic projections, you know, accurate data, and that it considers the training and development, just like Bola has been talking about, you know, upskilling our people, and you know, preparing them for the good quality work that we want to continue to do. And then finally, I wanted to touch on the CQC way. So we've got some recent autumn events that are bringing colleagues from around the regions together, and that's to help us gain a deeper understanding of our shared purpose, values and behaviours, but also about how each role plays a part in the delivery of that CQC way, and not just that, but our whole strategic direction. And I think the trade unions see that as a litmus test of the success of the CQC way, actually, is whether or not it's being felt in all parts of our organisation. And, you know, it seems it's not being felt everywhere. So our colleagues, and I know you've spent time there, Aaron, but our colleagues in the National Customer Service Centre, for example, the feedback from them is that they feel quite excluded at times from some of those CQC events and matters, the all-staff calls and so forth. They're our first port of call, aren't they? They're the door to CQC. They do a really difficult job. But there's a sense that they're being excluded, and maybe their concerns aren't being heard or passed on to senior leaders. And again, we can talk about that outside of here. We continue to hear around those cultural issues, and that's been addressed as well, I think, in our risk register with our leaders, continuing to develop that culture. For example, the freedom to speak up function, and the accountability framework for the CQC way. We're hoping that that's going to give us, you know, that will be another big step forward in terms of the culture. And Chris, you and I have been working with Jackie Jackson around a restorative just culture approach, which I know Julian was really keen, and which is a very successful tool for organisations like ours. So we're looking forward to getting some work done on that in the new year, working with Jackie Jackson and her team to look at some of those people policies with a new lens in terms of our culture and focus. Yeah, and just finally, just around the wellbeing initiatives, it's really important for our colleagues. There's, you know, the market is saturated with tools out there, but we're still seeing actually colleague sentiment surveys marking that colleague health support and wellbeing as quite low. And so it's about how we're evaluating and measuring what are the most effective tools that we have in terms of helping our members and our colleagues to maintain their health and wellbeing and thrive in our organisation. So those were the three key messages from the joint trade unions. I'm happy to take any questions, or when Z's finished.
Dee, thank you very much indeed for that. Aaron, do you want to make any comments? Or?
I would like to, if that's okay. I know Chris is keen to as well. We might be saying the same thing, but Dee, first of all, thank you for those observations. They're really welcome. I just wanted to say something on NCSC. You know that I spent a day with them. The skill and the compassion that I saw from colleagues at NCSC taking calls from in very difficult circumstances where people were calling us, it was just very moving. And they're also the very front line in hearing about the problems that we have in the organisation. So I wanted to recognise that. I cannot recognise every team just now, but just in the last couple of weeks, through those engagement events, one of the things that we've been saying when we noticed that people were clustering together in the teams that they know is to use that as an opportunity to reach out, because I know we'll be a much stronger CQC if we are connected and we understand how each of us contributes to that absolute purpose of keeping people safe and helping services to improve. But the work of the registration team, the legal team, the enforcement team, the QI team, the complaints team, that's what I heard lots about. These are teams that I didn't know that well because I was in an operational space, but just listening to their work has been really helpful to understand. And I totally agree with that sentiment, and very much so on the well-being point as well. Thank you.
Chris?
I was going to say ditto to what Aaron's just said, but just to elaborate a bit, I think, I mean, firstly on NCSC, absolutely agree. I think, I mean, I touched on their performance is tremendous this year, and they play a vital role. And it's not, I mean, last year was tricky for their performance. It is genuinely a fantastic achievement. I think picking up on Aaron's point, there was a lot of, I had a lot of chats with different colleagues across different events about the what about us, and we don't get a mention. Registration support, for example, was a team that said similar, and it is hard to try and make sure we've got we factored in everyone in our thinking. But there's something you said around that rippling out of the CQC way. And I think that's noted and acknowledged. And I touched on that with that risk and the inconsistency of leadership across the organisation. So I guess what I'd say is we're aware of that, and that'll take time. It'll take time for that culture to be rippled out across all of the organisation, 3,500 people and various leaders. But I think we're aligned in our thinking, which is probably a positive.
Thank you. Alex.
I just wanted to echo about NCSC. I had the privilege of shadowing a colleague there, and thank you for the Secretariat for arranging that, and really opened my eyes to the scale of the different topics they dealt with. And I won't embarrass the individual, but they were towards the beginning of their career, and the compassion and the way not only they dealt with that, they took me through the IT and how they have to log things, and how they, how we don't lose anything, and how they pass it on to different parts of the team. And it again, in an area of CQC I wasn't familiar with. So well, I think we're all saying very similar, but I found it a real privilege to be able to shadow that individual.
Esther.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks, Dee, and please pass on my thanks back. It's been a pleasure to support colleagues. I just wanted to pick up the point following from Chris's comments around isolated teams, because I was also really struck at the events, the number of colleagues I spoke to who felt isolated and in small teams and felt very disconnected from the wider work of the organisation. And so one of the themes that came up time and time again was how we communicate with colleagues. And I just wanted to acknowledge the challenges of doing that in a remote working organisation. I'm not saying that's not a kind of an excuse, but it is more difficult to do that. And we've been reflecting as an exec team about how we might do that better. And I know we've been talking about different ways of doing that. So I just wanted to reflect that, Dee, because I think it was a theme that came up time and time again. And I think we have absolutely heard, and we are thinking through that carefully.
Thanks, Esther. I would echo that. It came up when I was doing my review this time last year, the number of different teams that are isolated. And I think how we build one CQC is really a challenge for all of us in this room. And it's something we've got to keep working at, because it came through loud and clear from the events that we've just been holding. We can go on to you, Z. Do you want to give us your introduction?
Yes, good afternoon, colleagues. I'm Z Shiripinda. I'm a co-chair of the Race Equality Network, together with my other co-chair, Blessing Hale, who is not here today. The Race Equality Network welcomes the opportunity to speak to the board today. I first want to acknowledge the appointment and confirmation of the executive sponsors for our networks, which are the carers, the gender, disability, LGBT, and disability. I think I've mentioned everyone. So I just wanted to touch briefly on the importance of network executive sponsors, because it lies in their ability to drive impact and inclusion within the organization. We haven't had them for a little while. So now that we are on board, we welcome them as advocates for both their networks and the broader diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, providing strategic direction to our teams, network members, and securing resources. That's directed to Chris Asher, and acting as a vital link between network members and senior leadership. We hope that our exec sponsors' involvement will be crucial for our networks, is to help us in amplifying the voice of our members, promote the value of the networks, and ensure that the activities of the networks are aligned to the organizational goals. And in addition to that, we would want to see the impact of the networks and the support network initiatives that we have, and just encouraging participation from the board members as well. My second issue is around recruitment. We've had issues around recruitment and had a number of reviews. Equality networks welcome the increased involvement, conversations with the People Directorate. We've had the opportunity to meet the director of the of the People Directorate and their deputies. So we are working at pace together. And I think we've seen those positive relationships grow deeper. So we are, again, working with them closely to see how we can implement the recommendations of all those recruitment reviews that have happened in the organization. I now come back to the work of the Race Equality Network. And we just thought of, I would recognize the success of our network as we have been involved in across the organization and highlight areas we look forward to working with other networks and the board in the coming months. I'll start with the recent milestone as we have finished one of our most successful Black History Month events. Thank you to those colleagues who came. Those who didn't come, there's next year. We will come back bigger and stronger with more funding from Chris Asher. Members and allies showed a commitment to celebrating the professional contributions of our Black colleagues, as well as their culture and heritage. We are looking to build on this momentum and consider ways we can continue to recognize the colleagues through our Rebuild program. There is also an important element to this in that we are seeking to help the organization embed the CQC way and equality objectives. Our focus as REN is on how we can support our members, colleagues, the leadership, right through to the board to translate the CQC way into how we behave at work, how we hold each other to account, but more importantly, to work externally to ensure that providers continue to provide high quality standards of care, particularly to those marginalized members of our communities who we represent in the Race Equality Network, that they do have access to equitable care. We are also grateful as a network, like other sister networks, that we are a strategic partner to the organization. And one brilliant piece of work we've done, I think you agree with me, is making CQC an anti-racist organization. Our collaboration with teams, the Equity Rights team, has been intense, hectic. We have had input from the Policy and Strategy team, the People and Wellbeing team, and the Academy. And we were really a key part to the progress of this work. We did incorporate our insights from our lived experiences into the well-received anti-racism training module. By the way, if you haven't done it, please, it's still available for the board members to do. So we've used that, and we are working, contributing to the Participatory Action Research Group for a meaningful development opportunities for members. And this is a great example of how we as a network are solutions focused. REN looks forward to supporting CQC in meeting the ambitions outlined in the government 10-year plan. We are excited about this plan because it helps us give perspectives on how we can improve equity of care. And we are committed to see that the reforms do not widen those inequalities, and also that we can use the expertise of our members in embedding equity through our lived experiences, and to ensure the health system includes everyone whilst it evolves. It is also important at this point for us to recognize and celebrate the latest addition to our Race Equality Network family. Welcome to our executive sponsor, Chris Badger. We demand and ask a lot from you. We look forward to working with you as we help the organization strengthen its approach to equity, diversity, and inclusion. Our members will expect our REN leadership team and our new exec sponsor to amplify our voices as we are here today. Thank you for this opportunity. Happy to take any comments and any questions.
Z, thank you very much indeed. And thank you for being one of the people who led on the videos that we've been using in our autumn events as well. Colleagues, and any comments that... Yes, Kay.
Thank you for that and the variety of what you're doing. I'm Kay, I'm a relatively new board member, so it would be really good to understand a little bit more about the recruitment review and what the desired outcomes are from that and what you think are the critical success factors.
Thank you for that question, Kay. I can briefly say there's been issues around colleagues of ethnic minorities not having equal opportunity to progress within the organization, and where we've had challenges of people being overlooked for just development opportunities. So we've had a number of programs put in place, like the Inclusive Leadership Pathway, Successful Manager, reverse mentoring, to enable our leaders to understand where we are coming from and the challenges we face. We've made headway, but we are not yet there. Quite a number of reviews have happened, and we are starting to pick one by one on what was recommended. It is a big task, but now that we've got the people directorate on board, I think we will make good progress, and we'll see those small changes happening with colleagues of an ethnic minority background. Happy to talk outside the room more.
Well, I've actually got a question probably for Chris or someone else, which is we have an item this morning about our governance, so it would be helpful to know where those actions are being tracked and how then assurance comes up to the board. I mean, I know we have the sort of annual reports and things, but those particular actions, I mean, having seen that in other organisations, it makes such a difference. And we have just slipped into amber about the percentage of colleagues from ethnic backgrounds. So I think it's really important that maybe we could just think about it outside.
It's not a question, Z, it's a couple of comments and a big thank you. I always enjoy hearing your updates, so thank you so much. Just a couple of comments following on from your update. Just absolutely delighted, I know colleagues around the room will be, to have our exec sponsorship announced. And so I've got the privilege of sponsoring a disability equality network, which is appropriate because colleagues will know that we didn't get our accessibility requirements in regulatory platform right last time. So I'm really looking forward to supporting those colleagues. And it's Disability History Month at the moment. So for colleagues listening in the room, we're doing some work around that. So please watch this space. And just a big thank you to colleagues who joined our Brave Spaces Coming Out sessions recently, because they were very profound. My thanks to the panel members who shared some really personal stories about their families coming out and their coming out stories. And I know a number of colleagues approached me afterwards and just reflected on how helpful those sessions have been for them, both at work and in their personal life. So I just wanted to acknowledge colleagues' involvement. Thank you.
Thank you, Esther. Bola.
Thank you, Chair. Z, thank you so much for giving us that very comprehensive yet concise update of the work of the Race Equality Network, and to congratulate you and your co-chair and the network on an outstanding Black History Month celebration. I think you put together a truly impressive and impactful program of activities during October. So I just wanted to acknowledge that, and then to pick up a couple of points that you made. One is the support of the Race Equality Network in CQC achieving its organizational objectives. And I really do welcome the work that you're doing in terms of the review of our recruitment processes. I think it's a very important intervention that makes this meaningful and tangible, not a tokenistic way of transacting business. The second is the point around the CQC way and how the network can support us to make the CQC way real. You know, it's a commitment from us as an executive team and the entire board that we get to a position where the CQC way is not simply a conceptual framework, but the lived experience of colleagues right across the CQC. So welcome the network support in enabling us to do that. And finally, the work that the Race and Health Observatory are doing. They've been commissioned by the Department of Health and Social Care to do a whole nation review of the gap in ethnicity recruitment, progression, and pay gap. It's a very large program of work. They're right in the middle of that, and I really do see REN from a CQC point of view potentially making a significant contribution to that Department of Health initiative, which is being deployed and delivered by the NHS Race and Health Observatory. But thank you so very much for the work that you and colleagues are doing in this space. Thank you.
Yeah, welcome, Bola. Thank you. And thank you for being one of our guest speakers. It was a delight having you.
Thanks, Bola. Over to Chris Usher.
Also, just say thanks for a brilliant Black History Month, and the things I attended were great. And also to Bola, because you just touched on it there, but Bola opening Black History Month with one of the best speeches I've ever heard. It was tremendous, and I think everyone felt about 10 feet taller following that. Just picking up on the recruitment aspect, one thing I should have probably drawn on. If you remember earlier in the board, there was, as part of the ET update, there was a slide with hexagons, which Aaron called the blockbuster slide at the CQC way, and now I can't think of anything else to call it than the blockbuster slide. But one of the bits on there is about the employee life cycle, and that is how we recruit colleagues, we induct colleagues, we train colleagues, we do effective performance conversations, and there has been a recruitment review carried out. And I think it would probably be helpful if we set out what consists under that employee life cycle, what's already happened, what more are we doing? Because throughout that what we need to do is make sure that throughout that employee life cycle, it's built around our values and behaviours, with inclusion right throughout. So how we can amplify inclusion in what we do. So I think we can probably bring that back into a future session.
Thanks. Chris, another Chris Day.
Sorry, too many Chris's. A couple of things for me. Just firstly to say to Z, I thought the way the Black History Month was delivered is entirely setting the precedent for how we should do those things moving forward. And I know we've had in my own network, the LGBT plus network, we've had a similar show, but I think it really speaks to what we mean by the CQC way and our commitment to colleagues. So I just wanted to thank you as well, along with others. I also wanted to sort of build on a point that I think Bola made. The work of the colleague advisory group, which includes the networks and union representatives, will be really important in terms of how we deliver the organisational change that we are currently going through. Their advice, their support, their thinking about how messages will land and how to position messages has already been invaluable and will be invaluable as we go forward. So I just wanted to thank colleagues here today, but also colleagues not here who are part of that network as well.
So lots and lots of very positive comments, particularly about Black History Month, but other things as well. I think if there are no other comments on that, we can progress to any other business. And is there any other business around the table? David Rosedale-Appleby.
Thank you very much indeed. I was at the GMC annual conference this morning, but I'm not going to debrief you on that. I wanted to raise one point. I was inundated, perhaps an oversimplification, but many questions about whether the much appreciated move to sector-specific inspections, which, you know, everybody really approved of. But the questions behind it were, David, are these the same people who were in the general inspection and they've been split into, well, in their case, GMC, it was essentially 3, Chris, rather than 4, obviously. Or are there new people in there, or are they existing people who are being retrained, or what? What makes them really capable of this focus in that particular sector. So I'm just raising that because it was surprising the degree to which that question kept coming up.
Well, I can start and then Aaron may want to come in, and Chris. I mean, I think a lot of the people who were in the general operations directorate have backgrounds in specific sectors from their past lives. And what we have largely done is say, go to where you are most at home. And it's exactly the same as we did in 2013. But does that leave us with the right numbers in in each area? Almost certainly not, and that is something that we will be looking at very carefully over coming weeks. I mean, it's an urgent matter. Chris Badger.
Sorry, forgive me, Mike. I just wonder if I've got the opportunity to go back to a number of these people with more specific responses. If there are any that you can give me on that, additional training that's taking place, anything of this sort, looking at the three, Bola, to you, and but not so much Chris. I'd be very grateful if somebody could drop me a line, because I think when people raise questions, although I was able to give a certain amount of satisfaction in the answers I gave, it's always an opportunity to go back to these individuals and give them more specific information. So if you three chief inspectors have anything you can help me with on that, I'd be very grateful. I think it would be worthwhile. Thank you, Mike.
That's a request to the three medically orientated, if let's put it that way, chief inspectors. I think, well, let's hand over to Chris next.
Yeah, so I'm the non-medically orientated chief inspector, but the one with the most inspections. I would just say, yeah, your point, Mike, that a lot of colleagues have come from those sectors originally when they were already sector specific. But I'd also add 2 points. One is a number of colleagues I've spoken to have valued the opportunity to work in integrated teams because now they understand health and social care systems more comprehensively than they did before. And we know that when people receive care and support, that is across sectors. So I think that's helpful. Of course, as chief inspectors, we will, and it's early days, but we will be making sure that those colleagues have the right skills, training and expertise to deliver their roles, both now and in light of future developments that might be coming, whether it be the 10-year plan, liberty protection, safeguards, and so forth, and changes in the employee life cycle that Chris mentioned, particularly around things like induction, are really important, powerful points to make sure the skills and expertise of particularly inspectors are secured, and that we have a significant quality assurance process to monitor the effectiveness of those colleagues and put in support where we need to.
Thanks, Chris. Aaron.
Thank you. David, thank you for your question. It's probably also worthwhile reflecting on the fact that in the past our inspectors were sector specific, and it was kind of our leaders who were in more generic roles. On Monday, we had a meeting of the senior leadership team where one of our directors actually said that their team are reflecting on how they feel like they're coming home in terms of being in their sectors.
That was exactly the answer that I gave them, that this was a kind of reversion to the thing that our inspectors felt was, in a sense, more natural for them.
Yes, and that also provides us the opportunity for bespoke training to bring our SPAs, our National Professional Advisors, in to ensure that we're getting bespoke training for the needs of inspectors within their sectors. So all that work is now taking place. Thanks. Oh, sorry, Bola's hands up as well. Thanks.
Bola, was your hand up, Bola?
Thank you, Chair. Aaron has eloquently captured the contribution I was going to make, so I will give it. Thank you.
Richard.
Thank you, Mike. So just an observation on this conversation. I think Chris expressed it well. There's a bit of a danger we all kind of went to one side of the boat for the last couple of years, and then everybody charges over the other side of the boat, and it still capsizes. How patients, citizens, public experience care, they experience often all four sectors. And I just think we need to be sector-specific in our expertise, but widening our view to how people really experience our services, and we talk a lot through the 10-year plan about integrated care, about neighbourhood care. And I know I've talked to all of the execs about, you know, once we kind of get back on the right track, how we evolve going forward in terms of our inspection processes. So I think it's just a good, you know, I think David's introduction to the point is a good reminder that let's not just all go to one side of the boat. Let's kind of keep a balanced view about how people experience health and care services.
Really important point. Okay, any other business before we come on to the questions from the public? And we have 3 questions from Robin Pike. I think they're all from Robin Pike. And the good news is that these are going to be answered by others, not myself, but I shall read out the questions. How does CQC hospital inspections ensure that trusts comply with legal requirements of the NHS Constitution in relation to complaints, particularly in respect of trusts comprising a number of hospitals on different sites? Tolly, I think this one's come to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. I'm happy to address that. Just to remind the board really of what the NHS Constitution says in relation to complaints. So the Constitution sets out the rights of the public in relation to complaints, rights including having your complaint acknowledged within a time frame, 3 days, and properly investigated, being able to discuss who handles that complaint and when, and being able to go to the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman if you're not satisfied with how the NHS has handled your complaint, a right of judicial review and compensation and so on. The question is about how CQC hospital inspections ensure the trusts comply with that. CQC looks to at compliance with the regulations, but the regulation pertaining to complaints, which is Regulation 16 of the 2014 regulations of the Health and Social Care Act 2008, Regulation 16 overlaps significantly with the NHS Constitution requirements of trusts, and Regulation 16 is the basis for our inspection. So our assessment framework around Regulation 16 means that our inspectors will inspect in relation to complaints at a service level and for trusts at trust level. So if the service, for example, is maternity or the emergency department, the key question is covered under the responsive domain, and there is a quality statement called listening to and involving people. And that's the key quality statement in relation to responsiveness around complaints. But actually, complaint handling is not just looked at responsiveness, it's also looked at under safety. How does that organisation take the learning from complaints to make its services safer? Complaints handling is also looked at service level under well-led of that service. Does the service have the appropriate policies, procedures and oversight in place? And then, of course, particularly in this context, and it's a really good question, talking about multiple hospital locations in a big provider trust, that's where the trust level inspection is key. Does that, well led at trust level, does that account for how the organisation manages complaints? And so within the quality statements we use for well led, there are 3 quality statements, again, that are really relevant to handling of complaints. So are the leaders capable, compassionate and inclusive? What does the governance, management and sustainability look like in terms of the actual governance of the process and the oversight of it? And then under learning, improvement and innovation, how does the trust receive that feedback? And that's both a process question on how you deal with it, but it's also a cultural question. Does that organisation regard complaints as a nuisance? Or does that organisation actually regard complaints as a gift to support improvement? So that's really how the CQC would regulate. It is not for the CQC to tell a provider whether you should have policies for each of your areas or an overarching, but it is for the CQC to look at the consistency of how that trust handles it, and that would pick up really how the organisation divides it up. So I hope that will assure our questioner that there is a robust process to assess trusts with regard to how they handle complaints. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Tolly. I think and hope that shows that we take this really very seriously as part of our inspection process. So we'll go on to question 2, which is why are dental practices inspected so infrequently? many at intervals of over 10 years. Bola, are you in a position to answer that?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I will. I will respond to that. Thank you, and really important question. When we first had the powers to inspect dentists, we made a commitment to review 10% a year. At the time, the decision was made due to the assessed risk in that sector, and also a recognition that we don't have the powers to rate dentists in the same way that we would other sectors. But we do undertake responsive inspections. And this means when we receive insights or feedback from other sources that give an indication of risk or deterioration in the quality of service, we will stand up a responsive inspection. Also, as with all the other sectors, we are currently looking at our assessment framework. And as part of that, it's considering what should the minimum frequency of inspections be. And so that's not only in oral health and dentistry necessarily, but across the board as part of the assessment framework review that is currently underway. So it's to give an explanation about how we arrived at the current status, to give you a sense that even within that, we have mechanisms to mitigate risk through responsive inspections if we receive information that gives us concern about deterioration in the quality of service that people are receiving, and an indication of the way forward as part of our assessment framework review and refinement in terms of the frequency of inspections. I hope that gives our questioner the answer to that particular question. Thank you.
Bola, thank you very much indeed for that. I suspect that our third one is coming your way as well. The third question is, during GP practice inspections, how do inspectors assess the ease of access of patients to GP appointments?
Thank you again, Chair. So again, referring to the assessment framework, which is the methodology that we employ in conducting these inspections. The assessment framework contains a section that we call quality statements. And these are the statements, or if you like, the questions that we use to assess quality in particular domains. So there is a domain of the assessment framework called responsive. And so we use that responsive domain of the quality statements to assess the ease of access from different communities. The quality statement also enables us to inspect and also seek assurance that people can access the care, the support, and the treatment that they need when they need it. The other thing to add is that when we're looking at this area, our inspectors consider whether the process promotes equity. So it's not simply a universalist view, but whether the processes in place promote equity and that access is timely and in line with best practice. A significant part of that is assessing that people are able to access services when they need it, particularly in relation to physical or digital barriers, including accessibility out of hours, if you like, and in an emergency. So the responsive element of the quality statements from our assessment framework gives us the platform and the methodology of inspecting this particular area and seeking assurance from the practice in question that accessibility is of the quality that it can be for patients across the board, but also from an equity perspective as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Bola, for that. I think that's very, very clear that we do take both access and equity in access very seriously. Any other final points? That's the questions from the public that we've dealt with. I can't see any hands going up around the table, so at this point I'm going to say thank you all very much indeed. We next meet on the 11th of March. It's the 11th of March, is it?
Yes.
Right. Good. And so I declare the meeting closed.
Thank you.